Yeah, so I actually, after we get done here, I have a quick appointment. There's a place in town called Rose Nails. Very good, very good. They treat my wife really well. I'm getting my nails pink. I'm going pink. I'm also
Yes, please
never
do.
I've never been a phone case guy. I'm kind of like to live on the wild side. Go
Yeah. I'm
free
living on the
a little
edge. All
free
right.
free ball in there with the phone case. But I've already ordered myself a pink phone case. And
It's
I'm in
so
really
bizarre, man. It's
I'm
so
considering
stupid.
lip gloss too. I'm considering pink lip gloss. I'll
It's
try it.
so the backlash for Caleb Williams makes no sense at all. It's people not who aren't the Bears being very upset that they're not getting a generational talent at the quarterback
I
position.
I wish it was that simple. I do think it's a macho man world.
No, it is. Yeah.
Football is still dominated online, especially by a lot of meatheads. I consider
Mhm.
myself one of them a lot of the times. I like analytics. I like the deep thinking that sports can bring us, but otherwise, it's a lot of just like crack beer, eat pizza, forget about life, watch sports. And they don't love it. They don't love it. And I think there's
No.
an LA SoCal thing, which is also weird because he's from the Washington D.C. area. He then went to Oklahoma with Lincoln Riley, and then ends up in LA for 2 years because of Lincoln Riley. So he's getting this kind of elitist West Coast vibe when he's really not a West Coast guy at all. He's only been there for less than 2 full years and only to follow a coach out there. My biggest reaction to it, honestly, is like part of it. I truly believe is that there are so many people because Justin Fields is so well liked and he's such a kind of a always been a kind of a guy's guy, even though he was a vegan and we had that discussion on the show too early
Yeah.
on in Justin Fields, like dude's a vegan, he doesn't eat meat. That Caleb is going to get criticized for everything he does. And you know what? I'm a little okay with the Bears having a little bit of the diva superstar quarterback. The Packers had one for a long time and it worked out pretty well for them. And Patrick Mahomes certainly makes his headlines. Him and his wife they're in the headlines plenty enough. I'm okay. I'm
Yeah.
comfortable embracing having the diva quarterback as long as the diva quarterback comes with a 4,000-yard passing and 30 touchdowns in a playoff run.
Yeah, I was gonna say Joe Burrow is a flashy dresser himself. Travis Kelsey, and they're two of the most popular,
Yeah.
players in the league right now. You go all the way back to Joe Namath on the sidelines and rocking it. So yeah, it's just a distracting narrative and whatever. I mean, people are gonna say what people are gonna say. At the end of the day, if the guy plays football well, Bears fans will be happy at the end of the
Can,
day. So
can I ask
that's
you really
really all
quick?
that
Do you
matters.
think he does it on purpose? I feel like Caleb, especially when he was at the golf event down there at TPC in Jacksonville, and that became huge news in the Chicago area. Like, oh my God, Caleb Williams is at a golf event, not training, blah blah blah. Well, he trains in Jacksonville. He's in Florida. The event was literally like 2 miles away from where he trained at. And of course, like it's sports, it's competitive. I'm totally cool with my quarterback wanting to go and watch the elite golfers of the world golf. But I think after that kind of blew up, and people are like, oh my God, I want to ask you, do you think he does it just seeing what people will freak out at online? Do you think he said to himself, what if I paint my nails pink and I go to this game? Like, what? Like, will people freak out online? He's a guy of he's a Gen X or a Gen Z or whatever. He's a Gen Z. Like
Sure, sure.
he's in that mold of like where you do things on the internet for to cause shit, to stir the pot. Do you think he does any of that, or is that just his style and he didn't even think about the internet's reaction to it
Yeah,
before
I
he would
mean,
do it?
it might be a combination of both. It's hard to tell, right? It's hard to know what is inside someone's head. So I'm not going to speculate on his motives behind it, but I mean, I'm sure that could be a factor into it. I mean, especially maybe after the first few times he uh, you know did photo shoots and
That weird
dressed
dress thing
up
he
and stuff like
wore.
that.
Yeah.
And maybe once he saw how crazy the reaction was, this was his way of leaning into that and being like, okay, well then I'm gonna keep putting it in your face. That very well could be. I know when he painted his nails with the uh, "fuck Utah," during the game, and then they
Yep.
ended up losing. That people obviously, gave him a good amount of
He
shit for
gets
that.
a lot of
And
shit for
if they
that.
had won, maybe it wasn't as much backlash. But yeah, I mean, hey, Jim McMahon, did a lot of those types of things in a
He did.
different way, but he did a lot of those types of things.
Rodman
Just to
wore a
push
dress in
buttons,
Chicago, and they
and
handled it.
yeah, and that worked out pretty well. So, that's part of the culture of the star quarterback in many ways, and kind of just bucking the narrative and counterculture stuff. So yeah, it's fascinating, but I think none of us will be surprised when we hear his name called as the first name for the NFL draft this upcoming well, I was going to say this upcoming April, and it still qualifies as
Less
we
than a
got a
month
couple
away.
days till April, but my goodness, we're less than a month away from the big NFL draft. But of course, today's episode is focused on the top 5 quarterbacks as my dog continues to chew his sweet toy.
I
All right,
wondered what that
we're
was.
gonna get that. We're
Remy!
gonna get that out of here.
I thought you hit a sound cue or something.
Yeah, right. I got that queued up for anytime I talk. But no, so top 5 quarterbacks without a Super Bowl ring, an interesting list to compile together.
Yeah.
So we'll get into that. And of course, we'll get into some news that we've had over the last week or so of some new rule changes in the NFL that are going to be impacting special teams and defensive players throughout the league. So we're excited to get into that. But yes, our big show here today, top 5 quarterbacks without a Super Bowl title.
Two good people to put in that graphic. That's a good graphic there. I like that.
I'm just saying, are both of them going to be on the list? We shall see. We shall see. I only know my list, so I had to just put whatever I could out there. I think that we are going to have the same number 1. If we don't, I'll actually be quite disappointed, and I think there'd be a lot of explaining to do. But we were talking right before we went live here that it's very possible that we've got a different list outside of maybe one or two
A lot of
names.
guys
So
who didn't win a title.
Yeah.
And before we get into it, I think for me, one of the things that's interesting is when you rank the best of something, a lot of it is, well, this guy has a title, this guy doesn't. So when you're ranking all guys that don't have a title, for me, a little bit of it was like, well, it's kind of just preference at that point. You know what I mean? Because it's not like you can compare title to title. Like, how much weight do you put on playoff appearances? How much weight do you put on numbers versus how much weight you just put on, I like this guy's game more than I like that guy's game. And so there's a lot of names. A lot of guys did not win a Super Bowl title.
Yeah, and there's a lot of guys, pre-1990 who aren't going to blow up the stat sheet at all, but you're like, well, they're, Hall of Famers or they're almost Hall of Famers, and how do we weigh that versus guys who, if they played in the 70s probably would have been a Hall of Famer, but so there's a lot of quarterbacks out there, a lot to parse through for sure. Before we get into that list though, Mark, the NFL had its yearly annual owners meetings. And a lot of the coaches and GMs were there on hand to speak and take that always funny picture of all the head coaches together. With some notable misses this time, Mike Tomlin, Sean Payton, a couple that weren't
no
part
Matt
of the picture this
Eberflus.
year. No Matt Eberflus. But two big, things came out of those meetings. There's always a rule here or there that gets changed every year or added to, but a couple big ones implemented this year. First being the NFL kickoff rule, which is completely changed now. It's going to be just like the XFL or very similar, where they have 2 lines for each team. The line set up to block, the line set up to defend, and then they're going to have the obviously the kicker on the one side and the kick returner on the other side. If it's a touchback, it goes to the 35. So teams are now incentivized to kick to the returner and have them return the football. And then on the flip side, of course, the returner gets a complete head start, as nobody can begin running until the ball either hits the ground or is touched by the returner. So it's going to be a very interesting new strategy for these teams to implement. How are you going to attack this? How are you going to have a line of defense? Because if the returner breaks through that first line, there's nobody there. It's not a triangle like it was before where you could have tiers of defenders. Now it's going to be one line. And so, yeah, there's going to be some strategy involved to it too. I mean, your thoughts overall, obviously this now is going to, get the added consequence or effect of having multiple return touchdowns, something that's been missing for several years now.
Yeah, I mean, the NFL over the last, 15 years or so has done a really good job of basically eliminating the kickoff. And now they're saying, hey, this, just like they did with the extra point a couple of years ago, we want this play to be exciting again. And it worked with the extra point. I mean, there's a missed extra point once a game, it feels like now. If you're watching the game, and it's crucial. They're always important. It was important during the Super Bowl this year. So I think bringing an element back to the game, special teams, and really making it something different and unique. It's going to be weird. It's going to be wild. I've already had so many people ask me, like, hey, explain this to me. You're the sports guy. Explain this to me. I keep saying, like, I don't really know. You just have to watch it. Like, we're just going to have to watch it for a season to fully understand it. I know, as you pointed out, the main thing people need to know is it incentivizes a return. The returns will not have big collisions, but it also incentivizes your team. A team like who was it that just re-signed who just signed Cordell Patterson?
The Pittsburgh Steelers.
Pittsburgh Steelers. Like
minutes after this rule was announced.
Guys like that become extremely valuable. Like, what is this going to look like for Tyreek Hill? The Miami Dolphins. You know what I mean? Like, no one can start running until he touches the ball, and he's the fastest guy in the field. Like, that's going to be electric. It's going to be different. It's going to give guys in the college game, and you're going to see dudes get drafted this year who are just more of those, like, I think of the Bears example of Velus Jones, who you're like, why are they prioritizing him? Well, that's the dude who could maybe game break a play. He's not a great wide receiver. He's not really your number one running back, but that dude with the ball in his hands in space is fast and shifty. And if you're going to have to return it, the incentive of like, oh, the 35 is where teams want to be at, right? You know what I mean? So you were used to, offenses were used to getting that touchback over the past couple of years and starting with great field position. So offensive coaches aren't going to want to give that up. You're going to want to get to the 30, 35-yard line with these returns. So you're going to see guys have a chance to make rosters. I think that's cool. The other thing I think that's cool about it is the onside kick. We've lost. You can never have a surprise onside kick anymore. And that is a weird bummer for Sean Payton. The rest of the league, I think, will be fine. It's just, it's one of those like, surprise onside kick. I think they happen so rare.
Exactly. It's a once a year, if that type of thing.
It's not worth like diverting the rules. I love that we're getting the old onside kick back. So the old onside kick had like a 4%, somewhere in that range, I think, recovery rate versus the onside kick without the loaded lines. You can't have the unbalanced lines. It dropped down to like 10% success rate or less than that. So I love that if you're in that spot late in the game, you have to declare we're onside kicking it. But your team has a maybe 1 in 5 chance if you have a really great kicker, a Justin Tucker, or a Harrison Butker who's good at that stuff, to make a play for your team and makes your kicking game that much more valuable and that much more unique. And having those good kickers who can pin you back along the 1 yard line and make you catch that ball or things like that, you know what I mean? Or you can basically kick it and down it within the 1 or 2 yard line. So the returner has to pick it up and has to return it. You can hopefully make a tackle and get a guy in bad field position. I like the intrigue of the game. I'm not going to pretend I'm an expert in it until I watch it for a whole season. We'll do a year recap of a year from now. Was it good or bad? And then I'll claim if I'm an expert in it or not. But I didn't watch enough XFL, sorry. And I know it's coming back in the spring here shortly. Maybe I'll have to watch at least some highlights for the kickoff purely to have a better take or a more complete take on it.
Yeah, I'm completely open to it, and we'll see how it goes. I mean, it can't be much worse than what we already had, which was basically a nothing of a play. It was a time for people to go to the fridge and crack open another beer or grab some chips and salsa or something like that, hit a bathroom break. But now, maybe it's going to be more incentivized for people to pay attention and another opportunity for a big play to happen in the game of football. So I'm excited to see how it turns out. I do find it interesting that they went away from, the normal kick returns years ago because they wanted to reduce injuries and reduce the amount of, kicks that were being
Collisions.
returned. And now they want to increase the number of kicks that are being returned. It's kind of come full circle. This is a safer way overall. But we'll have to wait and see the long-term, effects of it and if it's successful or not. And look, the NFL is always willing to pivot and move off of things sooner rather than later. So rest assured, if this isn't a success, they'll find a way to work around it. But I think eventually when, you know, my kids are 15, 16, 17 years old, we may not have kickoffs. That's how I view,
We'll
like,
see.
I think that's the way the NFL is going. But this could save it. This could save it.
It could. It absolutely could. And again, it is interesting. You said it a great word there. It's like, well, in the name of safety, that is why they eliminated the kickoff, right? Because there was giant collisions, dudes running full speed, open field, boom, giant hits. The goal of this is to create basically an open in space. Think of like a screen pass, right? Where like a wide receiver screen, like a bubble screen. You're basically creating like a bubble screen. The players are closer together. And as soon as the guy gets the ball in his hand, it's all right. Now it's all out, like it's football. But you're eliminating that dude who's 230 pounds has been running downfield already for 40 yards at full speed and then spears me as soon as I catch it. Like, you're eliminating those mega, mega violent hits. There's still going to be some collisions and hits, but they're going to argue, hey, listen, this is still safer than any kick return we're going to ever do because the giant violent hits are gone. On the flip side, the other new rule they're talking about is all about player safety. They're encouraging more kicks, saying this is a safe way to do a kick return versus now eliminating a tackle by trying to say, because that tackle was unsafe for the players. And Dan, I have strong thoughts on the hip tackle thing. I'm very disappointed and frustrated for the NFL that they're doing this. They're creating a headache for themselves. They're creating a Twitter X outpouring of absolute chaos when it's going to happen. There's going to be the Ravens versus Steelers late in the game. Patrick McQueen makes a tackle on Mark Andrews. Is it or was it not a hip drop tackle, 15-yard penalty? Right. The Ravens drive extends. They go on to kick a field goal and win. Like, that is going to happen. And the NFL did a really great job a couple years ago when they retweaked the catch rule to get out of the gray area of what is in a catch. It looks like they just opened the door back up for what is in a hip drop tackle. And that was such bad product for the NFL for a couple years. I worry that in the name of player safety, they've really just going to do themselves a PR nightmare.
It's kind of, perplexing how this all came about, because really I hadn't heard of the, labeling of the hip drop tackle before last season.
Yeah.
And it had some notable injuries based off of that. And Mark Andrews, to me, being the most obvious one of the bunch. It's been increasingly more difficult for defensive players to play their position. Obviously, the league wants to move into an offensive, centric, performance, but at the same time, defensive players have to be given an opportunity to play within the bounds of the game. And most defensive players throughout the league, if not all, have completely come outspoken about this. A lot of offensive players too. I saw Kyle Long come out in favor of this rule, and he was getting some vitriol from other former and current NFL players, because he seems to be one of the few that is kind of siding with the NFL in this regard. I mean, I'll put it this way: the hip drop tackle, for those listeners that aren't totally familiar with what the league is talking about, it's when a defensive player largely is having to grab a player with their arms, and this player has a lot of momentum, and so in order to stop that momentum, since they're only being able to tackle them with their arms, it's usually because they're out of reach or they're having to kind of run them down side to side. They grab them with their arms, and to stop them from, dragging them 5 to 10 yards, they then lift their hips and their legs off the ground so that their body weight can drag the player down with them and kind of run with the momentum of the
Yeah.
tackle
It's
in that way.
basically
It
like
makes it,
Think
it's very
of the little kid.
intuitive.
Think of the little kid who grabs onto their dad's arm and they just hold on and they let go dead weight. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Just
dead weight on you.
that
Exactly.
dead
Yep.
weight. And what ends up happening is a lot of times that immediate gravity impact of the going dead weight drags a guy down. They
Onto their
land
ankles
onto
or
their
the back of
ankles,
their
their
knees.
shins,
Yeah.
and guys get their legs. The offensive player a lot of times gets their legs twisted up, like we saw Mark Andrews that snapped his ankle.
Yeah. And I mean, you put it very well when you equated it to the catch rule from years ago, because that is what we're going to end up seeing here.
Yeah,
Because while the league did outline specifically what they consider this to be, and that is, wrapping your legs behind the player and then landing on the back of their legs, uh, all the way down to their ankle, anywhere in that region. There's going to be instances where a player whips their legs around the front instead and lands like on the side of their leg, and then it's going to be, oh well, okay, what's the interpretation here? Does the league say because they went around the front that it's okay,
yeah.
or does the league say, well, you still did the dead weight thing and you landed on the side of his knee, and that could still be dangerous. I feel like they're going to have to come out with a very clear
Yeah.
plan with the officials, and the same issue that we've talked about for years is going to come to, which is the officials are not NFL employees, and so the officials are not probably going to have proper testing and
Yeah.
proper lengthy discussions about this until July, when they start getting ramped up, and it's going to be too late, and they're going to use the season as the test tube versus versus right now is when they
It's
should be
ugly.
doing it. Yeah.
It's ugly. I'm not looking forward to it. To me, it's also silly. Again, we had a couple injuries from it, but it's one of those things where how do you expect? A part of this is it's the tight end, right? The tight end is becoming such a big part of the
Too
NFL.
big and fast. Yeah.
And you have these 6'6" Mark Andrews, 260-pound Mark Andrews, who runs a 4.5, and he catches the ball over the middle, and you're not allowed to just nail him over the middle anymore like you could when you in the Ray Lewis days and the Lawrence Taylor days. And now you have a 5'8", 200-pound corner who's got to try to tackle him. Like, what do you do? And I think the only solution at this point in time, if I was the defensive coordinator, is I would prioritize my linebackers saying, hey, you've got to wrap up and spin down and spin and throw down, keep your feet planted. Like, always keep your feet under you, right? Because if your feet are under you and you have your weight on your feet, they can't say you dropped your hips, right? You have your own weight. Try to do that classic whip throw down tackle, right? Or your other option is the first person to make contact, you've got to just hold on it. We've got a gang tackle to shoot. You know what I mean? Like, it's got to be gang tackling. It's the only thing. You can no longer ask safeties and corners to make open tackles on big wide receivers and tight ends. Running back, sure, go for the legs, hit him in the waist, about the same height, try to bring them down. But if you're on a bigger person, you've just got to hold on. And honestly, just go down to the ankles too. Try to get the ankles, hold on for dear life. I know it'll look silly, but then hope your linebackers and anyone else can come in and stop that momentum. It's an offensive leaning rule. I hate that it's a 15-yard penalty. I hate that there's gray area with it. And I hate that we're losing a lot of physicality in football. Football is a physical, violent sport. I get taking the things out of the game for the head, helmet to helmet, spearing, leading with the helmet. kickoffs where you got guys leading with the helmet in massive collisions, head-on collisions. You got to protect the brain as much as you can. Oh, we got to. I know. Now we got to protect the quarterback's knees. Now we got to protect the tight end's ankles. Like, that's really where we're at this point. It just feels.
Well, and what about the defensive players? I wonder if this is going to now increase injuries on the defensive side,
and
because they're going to have to go with a lot of them do it because they can't. They can't. They're now going to be trying to lower their heads to go after the legs, and
what
they're
else
going to get kneed in the helmet a lot. They're going to get kneed in the head, and
are they allowed to still jump on the back of the guy if they fully jump up to make contact, as opposed to wrapping, then losing, then going dead weight? Again, the gray area is going to be a nightmare. The NFL, I'll tell you what, Dan, they never cease to amaze us with. It's the best sport in the world. It's the most popular sport in the world, and they can't get out of their own way sometimes. It's just dumb. Especially Mark Andrews being the great example of, poor Mark Andrews. He came back. Like, he didn't even miss the whole season. He was back for the team's most important game.
Yeah, right.
He got injured, week 12, week 13, and was back for the playoffs. So if that is we need to protect these guys, you're telling me that on the rare occasion the guy does have an injury where he's going to miss time, worst case scenario, has surgery, and he's back within 2 months? Like, come on here. It's just less than 2 months from Mark Andrews. It was overblown, overreacting, and hopefully it's not a disaster this year, but it will be.
Yeah, I fear that we are going to have some definite issues with this moving forward, and hopefully we can just kind of iron things out and figure out a way to make it work without completely overhauling the way we play football and the way the game is played and how we consume it. So, good luck, officials. Once again, you've got another task on your hands this upcoming season for sure. All right. Well, that was a lot of preamble, but important stuff to get to. Let's, kick ourselves into this great list that we've both curated, the top 5 quarterbacks without a Super Bowl championship. That does not include this does include quarterbacks that went to a Super Bowl but didn't win it. So there's just quarterbacks without a ring. And that's
don't mean a thing if you ain't got that ring.
So. Yeah, exactly. Like we do everything else, we'll start with 5 and work our way up and go back and forth. But anything you want to say?
Well, I have a long list of honorable mentions we can get to at the end once we reveal our list. I think to me, again, I want our listeners to remember, really ask yourselves, if you can't use championship games and rings is your argument for who's better than who, what does it come down to for you? And what does it come down to for me? It really came down to style of play, numbers, longevity, but also just the eye test. Like, that dude is better. Like, that dude he's a great player. And for some reason, maybe his career was cut short, or maybe what have you, just played at a time when there was a dynasty or something like that. You just couldn't get around it. So to me, those are two or three of the key things I kind of kept in mind when making the list. So I'll get it started. And at number 5, I have a guy who I believe is one of the top 5 just most talented quarterbacks, the God-given talent in the history of the planet, and that's Josh Allen. I have Josh Allen at number 5. I know some people maybe argue high on this list. He doesn't even have an MVP, but I think Josh Allen's at the point of his career where he's still got 5 more years like we've seen the previous 5 years. And so the numbers will be there. The accomplishments will be there. I think they'll get an MVP in there. And I think Josh Allen right now is very much teetering along that line of, he may never win one because of what the circumstances around him are going to be. And he's very, to me, Charles Barkley. So if you watch Charles Barkley in his prime, the dude is just otherworldly. His prime didn't last as long as other guys' primes, and Josh's might not because of the way he physically plays the game. But at his peak of peaks, there are few that you could argue are just better at throwing the football, playing the game, and fun to watch as well. So I have Josh Allen at number 5.
Josh Allen was an honorable mention for me. I think I had him at 6 or 7. Um, the reason I keep him off the list is, one, story's not over yet, and I know that
True.
that's not necessarily the list here, because the list is they don't have a ring and he doesn't. But also because, you know, he's had a lot to work with. He's had some really talented teams, and he hasn't even gotten to the Super Bowl.
True.
The number 5 guy for me did get to a Super Bowl despite not having very much to work with throughout much of his career. He's a quarterback I reference a lot. He's one of my favorite quarterbacks to talk about because he's not in the Hall of Fame, and I think that's a travesty. But also because he was an innovator and a pioneer in many respects for the West Coast offense, that being Ken Anderson. Also, Kenny Anderson has himself an MVP and a 4-time Pro Bowler. Stats don't completely blow you away. But obviously it was, a certain era in the 70s and into the 80s. And he probably would have had a Super Bowl ring if he didn't run into the dynasty that were the Joe Montana-led 49ers. So Kenny Anderson, for many respects, I consider to be the best quarterback, if not on the short list of like 3 quarterbacks that aren't in the Hall of Fame currently that deserve to be there. He did a lot for the sport. And I think what he did with the Cincinnati Bengals all of those years when they were pretty devoid of talent, and Ken
Yeah.
Anderson, constantly he was a winner. And he won a lot of games when it was very difficult to do so in the division he was in that conference, and just with what he had to work with. Plus, low key was a pretty good running quarterback. He had 20 rushing touchdowns in his career and almost 2,500 yards on the ground. So he was a little bit of a scrambler as well. But yeah, I think the MVP, the 2 All Pros, elevated him over some of the other people that I have as honorable mentions who either didn't have an All Pro, didn't have an MVP, or didn't even get to a Super Bowl. He checks all those boxes. And so for me, Ken Anderson is there at number 5.
Yeah, no, Ken Anderson's an honorable mention for me, and I couldn't squeak him onto this list, mainly just because of the couple names I have, and I'm looking at the four next names. I just love their talent, and I just love and their accomplishments speak for themselves as well. Number 4 for me, Warren Moon. Warren Moon is one of those guys that when you go back and watch Warren Moon highlights, if you're our age or younger and you didn't watch him play live, go back and watch Warren Moon highlights, and you'll say to yourself, that dude in today's era would be like number 1 overall pick. Like he screams what the modern day NFL is all about. And he did it at a time when people looked at an African-American quarterback as not being capable of doing the things that he did, and had to bounce around for so much, even though his talent was off the chart. So for me, Warren Moon deserves to be on this list. I couldn't put him any higher than 4 because the 3 guys ahead of him just difference makers, real difference makers. But Warren Moon is a great among greats, and I love him. I would kill for a Warren Moon to be the next quarterback of the Chicago Bears. Like, I mean, a massive, massive arm, did most of his damage from the pocket, and was absolute, kind of like gunslinger mentality, big time throw ability, and huge stats, and just, for a lot of reasons, didn't win a Super Bowl. One of them being like the NFL just didn't even give him much of a chance when he beyond deserved it, and he's wearing a gold jacket for a reason.
Yeah, I mean, almost 50,000 career passing yards and almost 300 touchdowns as well. But the guy played forever, and not to mention he had an entire career in the Canadian Football League before all of that. So that's definitely to be lauded. And obviously, 9 Pro Bowls I'm seeing here as I'm looking through kind of some of his accomplishments.
Well, Warren Moon stat,
obviously he's a Hall of Famer and everything. But what's the stat that stands out for you?
No, well, that's what I mean. Like when you start to compile all that and you say, wait a minute, he didn't even start his career. It's not like they're not adding in his CFL stats. And he's a guy that should have been in the NFL from day one, but went to Canada, had to prove himself, and then finally gets his chance. Warren Moon is, again, he's just one of those, like, you feel for him, because if he was coming out today as a prospect, Jaden Daniels. I mean, that's Warren Moon. I mean, that's these are guys you're looking at me like that dude is electric. How could you not take a chance on that guy? He'd be terrific.
Ferran was the one that gave me the most trouble as I was putting this list together. He did not make my top 5. Warren Moon at number 7 for me as an honorable mention. But yeah, I couldn't get him on there. But I certainly, the argument
Would you
can
say
be
Fran
made.
didn't make your top 5?
Did I say that? I meant Warren Moon.
Oh, okay.
That's my bad. Yes. I don't know why. Warren Moon did not make my top 5. I have him at number 7 there.
That's all right.
Just outside of it. And hey, the argument can be made. You make a good case. But I just didn't have him quite that high. I do have Jim Kelly at number 4, however.
Okay.
Guy got to 4 Super Bowls. Now,
yeah.
Yes, he didn't win any of them. So, you could easily, put the kibosh on that argument. But the guy got to 4 Super Bowls, was an extremely efficient quarterback, great leader, Hall of Famer. I think he would fit great in today's game as well.
Yeah.
He's just a very, very cerebral quarterback and kind of one of those that kind of transcended eras. He was a guy that really would succeed in any era he played in and had the necessary moxie, to tough out some of those adverse circumstances and take big hits and scramble when he needed to, kind of a do it all quarterback. And to be, fair to the argument, he had some of the best weapons around him and one of the greatest defenses as well during that time.
A lot of Hall of Famers.
So there's a lot of help he got, but Jim Kelly, for getting to 4 Super Bowls for me, having a Hall of Fame resume, just a lot of those intangibles as well, elevated him to me to above Ken Anderson and above some of these other guys like Warren Moon and Josh Allen that we mentioned before.
So I actually am using the 4 Super Bowls against Jim Kelly. I have him on my honorable mention, but it's one of those where it's like, I can justify why Josh Allen doesn't have a ring right now. He has gone up against Patrick Mahomes and beat his head in up against Patrick Mahomes. Just can't get by Patrick Mahomes, who is a top 3 quarterback, in my opinion, right now in NFL history. Jim Kelly had his 4 chances. He got there. And in none of those games could he seal the deal and elevate. Now, he deserves credit for getting there. He's on my honorable mention list. He's great, and he's very good.
Also, he constantly put them in positions in basically all 4 of those Super Bowls.
True.
Scott Norwood misses a field goal. Thurman Thomas loses his helmet the first series.
I understand.
Can't be out there. Like,
I will. It's why you make the argument. If Josh Allen, to me, Josh Allen, that's why it's a little bit of that fun playing that game. I can still sit here and say Josh Allen's story isn't finished yet. Now, if Josh Allen finishes his career never even getting to a Super Bowl, will I look at him and Jim Kelly differently? Yeah. I mean, Jim Kelly, I would probably end up putting then higher on this list than a Josh Allen. But for me, Josh Allen is a lot of that talent upside of just purely, again, if I'm going, I don't have rings to compare you. I have nothing.
Is Josh Allen a Hall of Famer if his career
so
ends
Josh
without
Allen,
a Super Bowl, and let's say he goes like 4 or 5 more years and calls it a career after 10,
probably not, depending on where his stats land and everything, probably not. No. But would I argue still that Josh Allen at his peak is a better quarterback than Jim Kelly? I think I could. That has argument. That has legs. So again, it's a little bit of like, how do you weigh?
What do you weigh more? Yeah, it's
accomplishments versus pure talent, especially when you don't have the ultimate accomplishment on your side, which is winning a Super Bowl.
Fair enough.
Number 3 for me, 2-time league MVP, Lamar Jackson. Lamar Jackson.
Oh, wow. All right.
Lamar Jackson is a 2-time league MVP. 2-time. He is the greatest running quarterback of all time. He is maybe probably, if you just take pure athlete, the greatest athlete to ever play the position of quarterback. And he is now got all the pressure in the world of being, to me, in the category of one of the top guys who doesn't have a ring. You can win two MVPs in the Mahomes era. And you don't even have a Super Bowl appearance. So that's where, again, I weigh the upside of the talent of Lamar Jackson, right? He can win 2 MVPs while Mahomes is also in his prime. They're in the same prime. Mahomes has 2 MVPs. Lamar has 2 MVPs. Same prime, right? Competing against each other head to head. And yet one guy's got the rings, one guy doesn't. And Lamar is that talented. Lamar is that special. And he's building a hell of a resume for himself. And the only thing missing right now is playoff success and Super Bowl success. And so for me, I look at that and I say to myself, he has accomplished with the multiple MVPs so much more than so many of these other guys in that realm of accomplishments. And then I look at him and I compare him a lot to, guys we've mentioned so far, and I don't want to spoil some other names in the list, but I just think Lamar Jackson's talent level is insane. It's just off the charts, immeasurable. But he's also on a shorter timer. Like we both, though, I think, would agree he doesn't have 10 more years in this league. His leash seems even shorter than Josh Allen's, where Josh Allen, you feel like he could play 8 more years. I don't think Lamar Jackson's playing in 8 years. And so in order to stay at this point in the list or move up on this list, obviously you don't want to be on this list. You want to win a ring. I could see Lamar Jackson winning another MVP. He's just that good during the regular season. He puts up eye-popping stats and numbers, and he's in a system that allows him to flourish. It just doesn't translate to the postseason success.
See, this is where we start to get off the rails a little bit, because this is how I'm viewing this argument. To me, it's almost like hearing you say, well, Mike Trout is better than Ichiro Suzuki. And so, like, Ichiro, did he win a title? No, I don't think Ichiro.
No, the Mariners.
He never won a title. So I would say Ichiro has way better overall
career.
Career.
Well, it's start and finish
together. Yeah. Even if Mike Trout is a better talent at the position, or at his respective position, and is a powerhouse, and has his MVPs, Ichiro career wise. So that's why, like, Lamar's played 86 games. Like, I get that he has the talent,
2 MVPs,
but to say
he's also accomplished things with 2 MVPs.
Well, so yeah, and so has Trout. But I would still say, if I were to say, like, if Trout ends his career without a championship, I would still put Ichiro ahead of, like, best players not win a championship. I would still, like, in my personal opinion, I would still put Ichiro at that point, because Trout was a little bit more inconsistent, and so I understand the argument, but I do feel that it's hard to compare current athletes with ones, especially if we look like 50 years ago. If we were, like, comparing, like, Larry Bird, if Larry Bird never won a championship, to Wembanyama. Okay, Wembanyama's probably better overall because he's, like, the athlete right now, but it's Larry Bird if Larry Bird never won a championship.
Like, I'm not gonna throw willy-nilly in there. Like, Joe Burrow's an honorable mention, but he has not accomplished nearly what Lamar's accomplished. He got to a Super Bowl, but Lamar's got 2 MVPs. Like, right? Like, so even though I think and I do think Joe Burrow right now is a better quarterback, but to me, that's why it's an interesting debate, because there's a lot that goes into this, right?
It is.
Because
let's just say this: if Lamar was on there instead of Jim Kelly and or Ken Anderson that I put there, I wouldn't have any issues. But the fact that there's 3 names that I feel very strongly about here in these top 3, and knowing that they can't all 3 be on your list, makes me very
I'm excited
confused.
to hear your 3, and maybe I missed, maybe I whiffed on someone, but I might have an argument against that person. My big thing is, so, like, for me, it came down to, all things aside, like, if I'm starting my franchise with the list of the guys who don't have a ring, right? I got to
Yeah.
take into account some of them have a complete career, some of them don't. And I take into account all these different things. To me, Lamar Jackson is an insane talent. He's an insane athlete. His upside is a 2-time league MVP right now.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And his
Yeah.
downside is Patrick Mahomes. Like, that's his downside. Like, his downside is very light. Like, his downside is Patrick Mahomes. Like, Josh Allen's downside right now is Patrick Mahomes. And so I look at Jim Kelly and I think the dude has an incredible career. He's a Hall of Famer. He deserves to be in the Hall of Fame. I'm not arguing against that. But was he at his peak a league MVP? Was he at his peak, you know what I mean, like a Super Bowl caliber winning quarterback? I still think Lamar Jackson or Josh Allen could be a Super Bowl caliber winning quarterback and eventually be off this list, right? Like, so part of that is that's where it's hard. Maybe if you would have eliminated like current players, then I think, yeah, but these guys are currently Lamar
No, but
Jackson,
that's what makes it an interesting conversation.
Like Lamar Jackson, if he retires tomorrow, I think you have a hard time keeping him out of the Pro Football Hall of Fame. He's a 2-time league MVP. It's not just a flash in the pan, Cam Newton, 1-time MVP, which Cam's on my honorable mention list. But you know what I mean? Like that's why I love this. This is such a fast, because when you talk about greatest quarterbacks of all time, it's really hard to argue against. He's got more rings. Like, the dude just won. He won. But these guys, none of them won. like none of them.
I guess like I don't know. It's hard for me because like I'll give away one by like.
Well, go to number 3. Go to number 3.
Okay. I will.
Go to number 3.
Number 3 for me is Fran Tarkenton.
Okay.
And and so Fran Tarkenton is on this list because he's gotten to a Super Bowl. He's got MVP. He's got 9 Pro Bowls. He retired with almost every statistical category being the leader in at quarterback. 100%. He retired as the greatest quarterback to ever live at that point. So yeah, I mean that's I don't even think there's much persuading needed on that front, because
number 2 for me, Fran Tarkenton. Okay. So like so I'm 100% with you. Like Fran is he belongs in the top. He belongs above all these guys. Like Fran is, and again, for our younger viewers who don't know Warren Moon or Fran Tarkenton, just watch those highlights. Like, you watch a Fran Tarkenton highlight and you tell me that dude couldn't right now, if he was a senior at Clemson, he wouldn't be talked about as like oh my God, that dude would be absolutely talked about as a top 5 pick and be excited about the future of his career. Like Fran was special. Fran was different in the era he played, and almost to his own detriment. Like, he was so unique in the era he played, it almost, maybe you could argue, prevented him from getting over that hump. Also, those Vikings teams had some really tough luck, like those Bills teams. Very, very similar situations. And it's hard to get to Super Bowls. And so, I don't hold it against him. Fran Tarkenton, he was on, I think, both of our list of top 10 quarterbacks of all time. And so, without the ring, it doesn't hurt him at all. I have a feeling I know who your number 2 is now.
I want take a guess.
Phil Rivers.
It's not. No.
Oh, okay. Who do you go to?
Dan Fouts. It's Dan Fouts for me.
Okay.
Dan Fouts also has the stats to back it up. Also has the historic career to back it up. He was obviously, one of the innovators there with Eric Coryell, and executed it to perfection. He revolutionized the quarterback position in many ways. Ken Anderson was the West Coast style guy, but Dan Fouts kind of took that a step further with the mind-blowing stats, in the late 70s into the 80s, where he was throwing for 4,000 yards routinely and throwing for 30 plus touchdowns before anybody else was doing that. And this is also a guy that, has the career accolades, has the Hall of Fame credentials, was an MVP. And so, that's kind of where, or no, actually, no, I'm sorry. He was the UPI MVP, which doesn't count very much. So he was runner up MVP on multiple occasions. So I guess that is a knock for him. But 6 Pro Bowls, a couple first team All Pros for him as well.
Yeah.
And I think he's better than Philip Rivers. Like, if I were to talk about just like starting a team, do you get Dan Fouts or Philip Rivers, regardless of era? I think I would take Dan Fouts. I think he's a more accurate quarterback. And Philip Rivers, in his career, we're talking about a guy who had every opportunity. Like, he's the one person that you could think about on this list that you could say they gave Philip Rivers chances. He had Vincent Jackson, he had Antonio Gates, LaDainian Tomlinson. He had some big name players to play with for many years, and then Keenan Allen towards the end of his career.
Yeah.
He had dudes. He had dudes a lot, and they couldn't get over the hump, which isn't all his fault, but he didn't even get there,
I'm 100% with you, which is why my number one is Dan Marino, and I assume that's your number one as well.
That is my number one. Yeah.
So was, I think we knew that. So let me go back to Fouts, right? So Fouts would be my number 6. Like, Fouts, I'm 100% with you. I love Dan Fouts. I think Dan Fouts is great. But when I start to look at Dan Fouts now historically, and you mentioned it there with the MVP runner-up a couple times, he was first-team All-Pro. But Dan Fouts now, to me, his career just looks so much like a Kirk Cousins, like a Matt Ryan, like a Matt Ryan won an MVP.
Well,
but
yeah,
Matt Ryan won an MVP
Ryan,
and went to a Super Bowl. You know what I mean? Where it's like, oh man, and Fouts did something at a time that people weren't doing. So I give him credit for that. And that's cool. But in today's game, Dan Fouts is Kirk Cousins. Like, he really is. He's like Kirk Cousins. He really is. He's kind of undersized, extremely accurate, and wouldn't turn the ball over much. But beyond that, as far as just like the explosive athlete person I want, blah, 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 blah. Like, I struggled with Fouts there. Like, I just look at, I'm like, do I want Lamar Jackson or Dan Fouts? Like, I'd take Lamar Jackson. Do I want Josh Allen or Dan Fouts? No, I'm gonna take Josh Allen. Fouts, again, has the career accomplishments of someone who is absolutely a Hall of Famer, especially what he did at the time he did it, which was different. But I do think Dan Fouts in today's game is Kirk Cousins, and he would drive us all crazy. We'd be like,
it's possible.
I like him. He's good, but can you win a game with Dan Fouts? Can Dan Fouts get you to the Super Bowl? That's what Matt Ryan's big problem was. And he had the one pop year with Kyle Shanahan, and everything else was just some empty numbers and a lot of 8, 9, and 7 win seasons for Matt Ryan. So Marino, Marino doesn't need us to give him his flowers. We all know Marino's definitely one of the top
number
5
one
quarterbacks of all time. He is the greatest. When you talk about just the statistical quarterbacks, he's the guy. I'd want Dan Marino starting for my team over any of the guys we've talked about today. Don't ever ring. Period. Point blank. Marino in today's age would be Patrick Mahomes. I truly believe that. I mean, you watch his game, gigantic,
a little less mobile, but yes, I agree.
Gigantic arm, extreme. He's very Joe Burrow with I think a better arm.
Yeah,
like squirmy, mobile, fearless, flashy, special. I mean, kind of Brett Favre-ish in his own right as well. Marino is great. He's fantastic. But this list is just such an interesting debate. Guys I really like: McNair, Rivers, McNabb, Matt Ryan, Jim Kelly, Ken Anderson, Fouts, Cam Newton. Those are my other guys that I think deserve to be in the conversation, but I just couldn't find them room in the top 5.
Yeah, it was hard. It was hard to find room in the top 5. My argument for Fouts, I think, and it kind of goes along with the Fran argument too, is, it's so hard to compare because you can compare them against current players and say, well, would Fouts outperform Josh Allen in today's game? Probably not. But that's also not entirely fair, because would Josh Allen survive the era of, even the 80s and 90s? If Ray Lewis was allowed to tee off on Josh Allen, if Ray Lewis was allowed to tee off on Lamar Jackson, would Lamar Jackson have the MVPs, or would he have been, too injured? I mean, I think about a lot of the highlights from Dan Fouts are him getting absolutely destroyed as he threw the football. And, availability was a big part of these guys'
No,
career.
well,
Like
and
Fran
see,
Tarkenton rarely ever got hurt, and he was a guy that was running for his life all the time.
I'll support your argument in the sense that I agree. If you put Kirk Cousins in Dan Fouts' era, he wouldn't be Dan Fouts. But I think Dan Fouts in this era is Kirk Cousins. Like, does that make sense?
No, yeah, I get what you're saying.
I do think Lamar, Lamar would struggle probably. You're right, in 80s and 90s and 70s football.
Lamar would still be extremely electric. There's no question about it.
He would be.
He might get banged up a lot.
Yeah, and but I do think Josh Allen could survive. He's so big and strong. I think his game would, because remember, most quarterbacks in the 80s and 90s and 70s, you wanted 6'4", 240 pounds. You had a bunch of Jim Millers running around. The old Bears quarterback. You're like, the guy's immobile, but he's big and strong. He could take a hit in the pocket. That's what it was. That was quarterbacking. Hand the ball off 30 times and then throw a deep ball off a play action and take the hits. Like, that's what you wanted from your quarterback, which is why Fran was so special and different and unique, which was why Dan Marino was so special and different and unique, which is why Warren Moon didn't even make it to the NFL until he proved it and he could do it in the CFL, because guys looked at him and was like, well, African-American guys don't usually do this, so we're not going to give you a chance. And so it's that weird converse, back and forth argument. It's a fun, fascinating argument.
It is.
I'd love to hear some of our listeners' lists, because I'm not going to fight too hard on it. I totally get why you did what you did. I just also want to justify why I did what I did. What I mean?
Yeah. So recap your 1 through 5 real quick.
Josh Allen, Warren Moon, Lamar Jackson, Fran Tarkenton, Dan Marino.
Okay, 5 through 1 there. Just so 5 for me is Ken Anderson, 4 Jim Kelly, 3 Fran Tarkenton, 2 Dan Fouts, and 1 Dan Marino.
You give more weight to the completed career and the accomplishments, which I totally get. For me, I just think about, it's the way I approach my top 10 too, which is why you got mad at me, because I had Staubach way lower than you, of just the raw talent thing. It just gets in my eyes. I trust you. Just
and I understand that too. I mean, I had Patrick Mahomes on there, and Josh Allen will probably be in there at some point. I don't think I had him in that one.
Josh is in an interesting point of his career. So is Lamar, where these guys could easily fall off this list pretty quickly too if their careers fizzle. Because like Russell Wilson, imagine if Russell didn't win that one ring. If we were doing this 2 years ago, I'd probably put Russell Wilson on this list. And look how quickly things fell apart for him.
Yeah, very true.
They're benefiting right now from the fact that the rest
or Michael
is still,
Vick. I mean, is Vick more talented than Steve McNair? Probably,
but the totality of the career, because both their careers are over, I'm going to favor McNair.
Right.
He's got the MVP. You know what I mean? He made it to the Super Bowl. So, because their careers are unwritten, like a Joe Burrow is close. Like if Joe Burrow wins an MVP this year, makes the Super Bowl and loses, I'd have a hard time not putting maybe Joe Burrow close to that number 5 spot on this list. But again, then if in 5 years from now Joe Burrow's fizzled out of the league, once your career is written, then it's easier to judge you against the guys whose career is written. For Lamar and Josh, I could easily see them both getting one more MVP, Josh having 1, Lamar having 3, and still being ringless in their career because of Patrick Mahomes and deserving spots in the top 5. That makes sense. It's kind of, I'm projecting out in that way.
No, that's true. That's true. I don't disagree with that notion at all.
It's fun. It's
there's
a fun
a lot
debate.
to be written for
sure. It doesn't matter.
No, it doesn't. There's no
March.
consequences.
It's the end of March on a football podcast.
Yeah, exactly. Give us some leeway here as we sift through the content.
This is what guys love to do, just saying names. So just saying names. We just love talking about names.
No,
guys.
Lists are incredible. Lists are
guys.
awesome. I don't think they still do them. The NFL top 10, those 30-minute specials, man, those were awesome. And they're available on YouTube for free now. I often, go back and watch
the heck out of those.
And the great thing is that they evolve. Like every 10 years, you can revisit those and make a completely different list, which is why I think they need to bring that show back, because there are a lot that need to be updated and include
We're gonna
some
do.
new names.
Well, I'm gonna put our money where our mouth is. This is we were talking before we started recording, kind of like what our schedule should be. April 8th is when we should do the top 10 players from 2000 on.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Yeah.
We were talking about we kind of have a
that's
window
right,
there.
The top 10 players.
We want to
millennium.
do a draft preview, an early draft preview next week, and then we'll get more into the draft as we get later in April. So we're kind of looking at April 8th. What should we do? I think that's what we should do then. Again, just lists and names. Because if you think about guys who started their career either 98, 99, or 2000 and on, I'll give little late 90s just because. Yeah, guys like an Urlacher, Ray Lewis,
or Manning, for instance.
The majority of their career was the thousands or on. Players who would have been eligible not for the all 90s team, but all eligible for the aughts team.
Yes.
On. Because it was inspired by Aaron Donald retiring. Where do you put Aaron Donald amongst not only the greatest of all time, but the greatest of the last 23 years?
Yeah, that'll be an interesting conversation too.
It is gonna be fun.
Defensive and offensive players.
We have the
whole room. As some special teamers, I don't know. Is Matthew Slater gonna make an appearance on that?
Well, and that's where rings do matter versus, to me, rings don't a little bit. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And especially if you were integral in winning a ring. Like if you were a Super Bowl MVP.
Yeah. Yeah. You've got a case to be made.
Julian Edelman?
Yeah. Julian Edelman. I love it. So I think April 8th, that'll be a good target date. So you already alluded to it, but just to kind of set the table for April for everybody, since that's going to be draft month and a lot going on next week, coming up in just a few days, actually, we'll go over a brief introduction to the draft, overall, just discussing the draft class in general, what we expect, some teams to go after early, just a very general high level overview of the draft. The 8th, maybe we'll do that list, and then we'll circle back the following week, giving our first round mock draft, which we try and do the week before the draft every year. We're going to draft for every team in that entire first round. And then something new we're going to try out this year, and we're excited for, is we will be live streaming on YouTube the first round of the NFL draft. So really excited for that. You'll get to kind of watch it along with us and discuss. We'll be if we have people, watching live with us that want to interact, that'll be the time to do it. And we'll get to talk with you and discuss some moves that are being made in real time. So excited for that. The first round of the NFL draft, that'll be happening on April 25th, the day that the NFL draft officially launches there on a Thursday. So a lot to look forward to, a packed April. We'll get excited for that as we kind of get into the more down months of May into June. And then before you know it, we're talking about training camp and preseason and off and running. So excited for it. Appreciate having you all here with us. As always, like, subscribe, hit us up on YouTube at FB Launch Pod. Appreciate any love you can give to our podcast network as well, for fantasysaqc.com. Part of the For Frequency Sake Podcast Network. Excited to be there as always. Appreciate you being here with us, and we will see you back here next week.